But first, clean up on aisle Harris. More than a month after deposing Joe Biden as a candidate in what can only be called a coup, Kamala Harris has finally sat down and given an interview to CNN. Well, at least they called it an interview, though for my money, the whole thing, right down to the introduction, looked more like a campaign ad. I mean, we're talking about a package that was basically, when you boil it down, just a promo puff piece, about as informative as a corporate video from a sprocket company. And while I have no idea whether the Harris campaign got the questions ahead of time, the entire interview seemed to have been scripted with the goal in mind of getting Harris on the record answering a few difficult questions. The only problem is, scripted or not, Harris wasn't very good at answering them. And not only that, she had to have along with her her emotional support puppy, a.k.a. running mate Tim Walz, sitting there as well, looking a bit like someone's dad when they go for an interview at McDonald's. Now, the interview started with an obvious question.
Day one, it's going to be about, one, implementing my plan for what I call an opportunity economy. I've already laid out a number of proposals in that regard, which include what we're going to do to bring down the cost of everyday goods, what we're going to do to invest in America's small businesses, what we're going to do to invest in families, for example, extending the child tax credit to $6,000 for families for the first year of their child's life, to help them buy a car seat, to help them buy baby clothes, a crib. There's the work that we're going to do that is about investing in the American family around affordable housing, a big issue in our country right now. So there are a number of things on day one.
So that's what they're going to do on day one, mostly a bunch of platitudes. And for a moment, it looked like this might have turned into a tough interview because CNN's Dana Bash, well, actually asked a follow-up question.
You have been vice president for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
The steps that you're talking about now, why haven't you done them already?
Well, first of all, we had to recover as an economy, and we have done that. I'm very proud of the work that we have done that has brought inflation down to less than 3%. The work that we have done to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. Donald Trump said he was going to do a number of things, including allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Never happened. We did it.
Again, it's pretty clear what happened here. After much negotiation, the Harris camp and CNN managed to pull together an interview that would allow CNN to look like they were asking a few tough questions, and for Harris and Walz, it was a chance to do some cleanup. Meanwhile, the rest of the program turned out to be a great rah-rah rally for Harris. So, it was only natural that there would also be questions about Bidenomics.
You maintain Bidenomics is a success.
I maintain that when we do the work of bringing down prescription medication for the American people, including capping the cost of the annual cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000, when we do what we did in the first year of being in office to extend the child tax credit so that we cut child poverty in America by over 50%, when we do what we have done to invest in the American people and bringing manufacturing back to the United States so that we created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs, bringing business back to America, what we have done to improve the supply chain so we're not relying on foreign governments to supply American families with their basic needs, I'll say that that's good work. There's more to do, but that's good work.
Oh, hard-hitting stuff there. Now, indeed, one thing she wants you to know, though, is that despite having taken multiple positions on everything over the course of her career, Kamala Harris, well, her values, they have not changed.
The most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. Let's be clear, my values have not changed. That value has not changed. My value around what we need to do to secure our border, that value has not changed.
And with that out of the way, well, the interview was pretty much all happy talk. You know, how the nieces were over doing a puzzle when Joe Biden called to say he was stepping out of the race. And then there was also this.
The photograph that has gone viral. You were speaking one of your grandnieces that you were just talking about, was watching you accept the nomination. You didn't explicitly talk about gender or race in your speech, but it obviously means a lot to a lot of people, and that viral picture really says it. What does it mean to you?
You know, I am running because I believe that I am the best person to do this job at this moment.
What a masterful bit of propaganda by CNN and the Harris campaign. Pretend you're doing journalism, and then with what could have been a hard-hitting interview, turn it into fluff, complete with swelling inspirational music.
Welcome on board.
Thank you. It's good to see you. This is not where Vice President Harris thought she would be. We're going to Georgia.
Yes. 7th trip there this year for me.
A surprise nominee for president just months from Election Day. Set in motion after a stunning debate.
Are you feeling the joy yet? Oh, and of course, plenty of candid moments from on the road.
And finding his own rhythm with his new boss.
What'd you order? Brisket and greens and mac and cheese.
What about you?
I had the brisket and coleslaw on this.
And what about the spice situation, the Tabasco? What's happening with that?
I'm going to let him speak for himself.
The vice president's growing peppers at her residence, so she's trying to bring me along on this. You know, Minnesotans.
It's okay.
I'm getting there.
It's all good. You just do you.
Honestly, does Tim Walz have any shame at all just being the butt of this cosmic political joke, set up as the dopey, clueless dad like something out of a TV commercial or sitcom? Anyway, of course, this is all totally predictable. I mean, we are talking about CNN, and specifically CNN's Dana Bash here. I mean, this is somebody who can do fiery, but only when she's defending Democrats.
You have Joe Biden bragging on tape in January 2018, Dana, saying, and I said I'd be on the ground 90 more minutes, and if you don't believe me, call Barack.
Okay. There's no evidence. For the record, there is no evidence that Joe or Hunter Biden did anything wrong. Let's move on. Let's move on.
No evidence. No evidence. Do you hear her? Anyway, I'm sure, though, this bit of Dana Bash's commentary hasn't always been exactly a selling point.
Put forward male figures, Tim Walz being one of them, Doug Emhoff last night, who can speak to men out there who might not be the sort of testosterone-laden, gun-toting kind of guy.
Hey, gents, are you suffering from low testosterone, a manliness deficit? Well, the Democrat Party wants to hear from you. Seriously, though. Looking back at this interview, what I do know is that this could wind up being a big problem for Harris, who seems to think she can just ride into the presidency on the vibe of the thing. Even in this controlled environment, though, there was nothing really resembling an answer to so many important questions. And then there is this question. How will she go in the debates when there is no phone a friend? Or, God help us, as president, when she's the one who will ultimately have to make the call.
Well, the debate on whether to have nuclear energy in Australia continues right now. There is plenty going on in the nuclear space, including startups for batteries that can power small towns being designed by Australian companies. Well, joining us live is Jasmine Diab, the president of Women in Nuclear Australia. Jasmine, great to see you. So let's not talk about the nuclear debate just for now. Let's talk about what's happening in this space, including nuclear batteries that can power small towns. And this is being designed by an Australian company.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of Australian startup companies that are looking at nuclear batteries, which, unlike the traditional reactors we talk about, utilise nuclear materials in smaller amounts to generate smaller amounts of electricity, and things that are perfect to replace areas that have generators or engines to provide that reliable power and energy for those systems. But it's not just in the nuclear battery space. Like I said, there's also startups that are looking at things like fusion technologies, which is also really exciting. So we've got HB11, which is an Australian startup, and then some researchers out of UNSW, students developing a small fusion reactor as well. And so it's really exciting hearing about the nuclear scientists and engineers in Australia are still continuing to innovate and grow nuclear technologies as we still have that nuclear debate carrying on in the background.
And overseas, we're just hearing China has approved, I believe, 11 nuclear reactors, investing approximately $33.3 billion. And there's quite a bit of talk on women in nuclear from the IAEA, for example, and they're looking at increasing their numbers. I believe they have already, and energy bills being passed in the US. Of course, that's a bipartisan issue there, but they're being fast-tracking their nuclear energy as well. What can you tell us about what we're seeing overseas?
Yeah, so overseas, we're seeing a lot of countries reinvest into nuclear, but in doing that, they've realised that the workforce has to be more balanced. Now, the nuclear industry for a really long time has been heavily male-dominated, and a report released late last year by the Nuclear Energy Agency highlighted that we need to do more to attract girls and women into nuclear careers and allowing them to thrive not just in junior roles, but growing into senior leadership roles as well. And so the International Atomic Energy Agency and DG Grossi have invested a fair bit in programs to encourage young women into nuclear careers, because nuclear careers are exciting and they are well paid and you get to see the world, which is pretty phenomenal. Not a lot of industries get to claim that. And so it's exciting to see that investment in there. And hopefully we will see more Australian young women and girls pursue nuclear careers as well.
And what about in the agriculture space? Again, the IAEA has just released an article on Climate Start Agri, enabling Asian farmers to increase rice productivity.
Yeah, so nuclear technology is used in food production isn't a new thing. And our nuclear organisation here in Australia, ANSTO, has been working significantly with fisheries to ensure that food is secure, that food is safe to consume, and that it can be exported and grown in large amounts. And so that article from the IAEA talks specifically to rice production to help crops increase its production in areas where they've really struggled to grow rice crops. And so it's important when we look at nuclear, we're looking at more than just the power and energy debate. There are so many amazing facets of nuclear science and technology that help us in everyday life. And food production and agriculture is a really big one that we use not just here in Australia, but around our region.
And just finally, with the nuclear debate, obviously we're hearing that it's way too expensive for Australia to have nuclear energy here at this stage, and we're certainly looking at the time frame as well to reach our net zero target. Not that people are saying that it's a bad energy to use. Obviously the debate continues, but if the costings do come before Christmas, which I believe Ted O'Brien mentioned on Sky News this week, that it could be a possibility, what are you going to be looking at in this space?
So I guess there's two parts to this answer. The first one is for Australians to realise that nuclear economics is different to every other energy source. And so when the coalition releases these figures, they will be high, but I would suggest to people to look at it holistically at a full system cost, and taking into account that nuclear power plants last for 60 to 80 years. So we need to look at these costs in comparison to how many times do we have to replace other systems within that 60 to 80 year life cycle, and look at those aggregate costs and see that nuclear, whilst it is expensive up front, in the long term actually balances out and is almost on par with a lot of these other energy sources. And the things I'll be interested in understanding is how much of these costings are going to be government sponsored, because it's important for nuclear facilities to be government sponsored from a regulatory and assurance perspective, and how much is looking at private investment, because that's also a really interesting facet, because globally we've seen an increase in private investment in nuclear technologies, which is exciting because it allows for quick innovation and growth within the sector, which is good for us now and in the long term.
Well, cybersecurity researchers claim around 20% of the world's solar power output has been vulnerable to a cyber attack after experts were able to gain access to solar panel systems used overseas and in Australia. Now, for more on this, I am joined by Bogdan Botezatu, who is the Director of Threat Research and Reporting at Bitdefender. Bogdan, thank you for joining me. Can you start by telling us what did your researchers discover?
Good afternoon. We discovered a series of vulnerabilities in cloud infrastructure that helps people get connected to their own inverters at home. So what happened was that we were able to hijack devices that would not belong to us, and we started looking at how big this infrastructure is. Soon after that, we realized that we had potential access to 2.2 million installations, ranging from home setups with 1 or 2 solar panels up until large solar parks that produce significant energy. In total, we're speaking about 195 gigawatts of solar power production that we had discretionary access, even if we were not the owners of those installations.
And so how were you able to get access to those systems? What was the problem?
We are cybersecurity researchers, and we focused on the Internet of Things security. We normally analyze devices like smart speakers, smart TVs, IPTV cameras, and anything else that starts with smart. This time, we looked into an inverter device that one of our colleagues had at home, and we started poking with it just out of the force of habit. We realized that the way the inverter connects to the internet is vulnerable. So the cloud would not verify if we are the legitimate owner or not. There was a shortcut that would allow us to log in as pretty much any user on this 2.2 million client platform and take control of these devices. So these devices are made out of 3 important pillars, building blocks. A solar setup is made of solar panels that sit on the home and get the sun's energy. The inverter, that's the brain of the setup. It understands how to convert the energy and what to do with it. The battery pack, which is an optional asset, but most of the inverters can pump the solar energy into the battery, and a device that's called a controller, a dongle that joins everything with the internet. And this is the culprit. This device is able to communicate with the internet, and the larger distribution platform can contact the inverter itself in exchange. So we were able to intercept this communication, impersonate as users, and connect with all the inverters that were on the network.
If these systems had been accessed by cyber criminals, and I should make the point that we are not suggesting they were, what sorts of harm could potentially be caused?
Normally, when you're hacking into an IoT device, you get into a person's home and that's it. You're exposing their privacy. You would be able to maybe listen into conversations or watch them on an IPTV camera. This time, though, the situation is a little bit more dire because these devices are connected not only to the internet, but also to the national grid. And this is a very serious situation because these inverters pump energy into the national grid. So a cyber criminal with access to an inverter would be able to tweak these grids, these inverter settings, override the grid, and start desynchronizing it. Normally, when inverters pump energy into the grid, they do so on a heartbeat. There's this sine wave that goes up and down that we usually associate with electrical energy. All devices that produce electricity on the network are synchronized to this sine wave. This is the heartbeat of the network. If we're pumping energy at a faster or a slower pace than that sine wave, we desynchronize the network. When this happens, the network becomes stressed and understands that it's in danger, so it has to disconnect parts of the network to be able to stay up and running. So one of the most important things that cyber criminals could do was to desynchronize the input of electricity to cause these unexpected disconnects, which will lead to blackouts. In addition to that, and on a smaller scale, cyber criminals could be able to tamper with the inverter settings for it to, rather than pump current into the network, to absorb power from the network and charge batteries or not do anything at all. In this case, the cyber criminals will be able to take out more energy into the grid that it's being produced, thus putting stress on the energy and increasing the legitimate owner's electricity bill.
It's pretty scary stuff. Thank you so much for sharing your research with us, and I will make that point again, that there's no suggestion that these solar panel systems were accessed by cyber criminals or that any solar panels in Australia were affected.
Well, Chris Bowen loves to involve himself in every aspect of our energy use while also telling us which car we should drive. Of course, I'm talking about the electric vehicle push. I mean, never mind, of course, the cost, the unreliability and the complete lack of infrastructure to cater for these vehicles in this country. But now it's been revealed that electric vehicle sales are being propped up by a tax discount that Treasury officials have forecast will cost 4 times more than previously expected. Yep, that is what is supercharging this EV announcement. Joining me now is Liberal MP Andrew Wallace. Andrew, really good to see you. It seems Labor is taking a shocking policy and making it look like tax reform, but that's clearly backfired.
Well, Danica, I don't care what sort of car you want to drive or what anybody else wants to drive. But what I do object to is those other people who don't have electric vehicles, they are now subsidising those that do to the tune of $1.2 billion. That's 4 times what Treasury originally estimated. That's $1.2 billion that taxpayers who don't drive an electric vehicle are having to find and pay through their taxes to keep electric vehicles on the road. I think it's utterly objectionable. If you want to drive an electric vehicle, knock your socks off, but don't expect me to pay for it.
Well, it's just complete madness. You know, they're pushing this electric vehicle crusade, and clearly it's absolutely backfired. Now, I want to ask you about another big story that's been around today, and that's the census, because we saw the Prime Minister this morning backflipping on the removal of a 2026 census question gauging the gender diversity and sexuality of Australians. Andrew, look, I'm baffled by this because the census is 2 years away. Who cares? We are in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Why is this the priority suddenly?
Well, Danica, I think what we're seeing is the fracturing of the Labor leadership here. I mean, I can't remember the last time when en masse Labor backbenchers and frontbenchers criticised publicly the government position on this. Anthony Albanese cannot hold a policy position from one day to the next. Yesterday he said it wasn't going to be in. Today, as a result of that pressure that's being brought to bear by his own colleagues, has backflipped on it. I think what we're starting to see is Anthony Albanese is getting very worried. He's watching his back, he's watching his backbench, but more importantly, he's watching his front bench too.
Absolutely. Now, the group Muslim Votes Matter says it is prepared to back the Greens and Teals over Labor at the next federal election. Andrew, this group is going to be launching its national campaign in Melbourne on Sunday. What does it mean for the coalition, do you think?
Well, Danica, what it means, this is another independent, this so-called independent group of candidates. But at the end of the day, it's all a big smokescreen, because a vote for an independent, whether they be a community independent, whether they be a Teal, whether they be the Greens, at the end of the day, all of their preferences are going to go to Anthony Albanese. So a vote for anybody other than a Liberal National Party member or candidate is a vote to keep Anthony Albanese in the lodge. Now, after 2.5 years of wrecking the Australian economy and dividing Australians, dividing us on race, dividing us on what sort of vehicles we want to drive, they have been utterly divisive now on sexual preference. I just think that, this is a situation where Anthony Albanese is really losing the plot. And if we have a situation where people are providing a vote for an independent, that is going to mean a vote for Anthony Albanese. And I just think, I implore people, if we thought that 2010, the minority government in 2010 was bad for Australia, I implore people to remember back to those days, because a minority, Labor, Green, Teals and a host of other independents is going to be absolutely disastrous for this country. And I really am very, very worried about the future of this country if we see that sort of a grouping in a minority government with Anthony Albanese as its leader.
Yeah, we can't go back to those Labor-Greens alliance days. Andrew Wallace, really good to speak with you. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Danica.